So thank you so much for joining my Substack Live today. There's a couple of things I wanted to talk about. Hi, Mary. I'll just wait for a few more people to join. Hi, Meg. How are you? Um, and I want to talk about a few things today. Hi, Mac. um, thank you so much. Hi, Marnie. Thank you for joining again, Marnie. Appreciate that. I know you said you were going to join. Hi, Dave from SoCal. Don't know what that is. Not sure what that is. Um, Hey, hi, Marnie. Thanks for the love hearts. Thank you all for joining. Today I wanted to talk about a few things. I mean, obviously, Trump. A couple of things I want to talk about. Hi, Meg from Southern California. Hi, Jude. I want to talk about a few things. One of the things I want to talk about is Trump, basically Southern California. Thank you. Hi, Dave. Southern California. That's good. I love. Oh, that's. I'm sure that's a great area. Thanks for the love hearts, guys. Yeah, thank you so much. One of the places I've always wanted to visit, because obviously I'm from Australia. One of the places I've always wanted to visit in America. There's a couple of places. One is Washington DC, which I probably wouldn't want to be there right now. The other one is California. The other one is Oregon, and sort of those type of areas, and even Texas. I've also wanted to visit around there as well. But yeah, in Australia, surfing is like a big thing over here. So I'd love to go to. I don't live far from the beach, although they're not really proper beaches where I am. But growing up in Sydney, I grew up near the beach, so I love being near the water, near the beach, near the surf. So yeah, that would be one thing I'd love to do. But anyway, so today I want to talk about a few things. One of the things I want to talk about is obviously Trump firing the Bureau of Statistics lady for just doing her job. And what I've been noticing a little bit, it's not just the fact that he sort of fired her for giving numbers, right, that he didn't like or he didn't agree with. It's also the fact that I'm noticing a lot of people who are kind of like the tech people, and they supported him. They're like people who kind of came out and supported him, um, but they never supported him before, like they were Biden supporters. Thanks, Barry, for joining. And they're coming out and making excuses for him, right? Thank you for the love hearts. And the excuses that they're basically saying is like, yeah, no, no, this is why I encapsulates the whole movement for me as well. Hi, Natasha. Thanks for joining. Is that a lot of these people, right, who are kind of the tech world, they're entrepreneurs and things like that, they jump behind Trump at the last election because they could see, that basically he was going to work in their favor, right? But it's actually quite incredible what we're seeing at the moment with the tech world and that they basically may come up with the excuse that, okay, so it's not good that he fired, right? He fired the labor statistics person. But remember, these tech people, they're all into business and transparency and all that sort of thing. Yet they supported a president, right, who will fire anybody who gives him information that he doesn't want to hear. This is like something you'd hear from Stalin. Like they used to make. There would be like all these jokes in the background. When Stalin was in the Soviet Union, and that they would just give him the statistics that he wanted to hear, because if you didn't get them, you'd either be fired or sent off to the Gulag. Now, he's not sending off people to the Gulag, but he's certainly firing people. And a lot of the excuses that people who voted for him, who are kind of like these techie people who aren't like full MAGA, is, well, there is problems with the numbers, right? Which means that, the tech bros, that's right, money. And a lot of these, they're saying, oh, well, the numbers aren't always accurate. Then a couple of months later, they'll go back and review them again. But there's a difference between that and being rigged. Trump is not saying that the numbers are inaccurate, right? Just generally speaking, for anybody, whether it's Biden or Trump. He's saying they're rigged against him, right? So that's the part that these people don't want to talk about. Instead, they will say, well, yeah, the numbers are not accurate. And all he's pointing out is the fact that, they need to get better accurate numbers because they keep renewing, they keep changing them in a couple of months. They're two different arguments, and they're conflating the two arguments on purpose to cover for it, right? To cover for it, and they're always covering for him, right? They'll say, and they always preface everything with like, yeah, look, I don't agree with firing and that, but he's making people. This is the other bit, right? So apparently, there is an argument to make that the way they get the statistics, right, is they do polling, right? They get polling and things like that. And they don't have enough money. Thank you so much for the love hearts. They don't have enough money to do proper polling. So they need extra money so they can poll more people. The more people you poll, the more accurate it is. Now, it's still fairly accurate, but it's not, it usually takes a couple of more months, right? For it to be like super accurate. So sometimes they'll review it in a couple of months, right? They did that with Joe Biden. Another thing that Trump has been lying about is he's been saying that these number statistics when Biden was in power, they said Trump has been lying. Again, he lies all the time, so we shouldn't be expected. But Trump has been saying that the Bureau of Statistics last year, right? Hi Lucas, last year was lying on purpose by saying early last year that the numbers were really good, right? And then they reviewed the numbers after the election, and then the numbers were bad. This is a lie. They actually reviewed the numbers in August, months before the election. So he keeps just lying about. So he takes a little bit of truth, which is they did actually change the numbers a bit, which they do on a regular basis all the time, right? When they get new data coming in. But where he made it a lie is that he says they reviewed the numbers after the election. So therefore, it gave Kamala Harris an advantage because they gave her good numbers, and then we realized years later, like after the election, it was bad numbers. But where he's lying is that it actually the numbers were renewed in August, months before the election. So this is a massive lie, right? Because there's a difference between renewing the numbers after the election and before the election, because she doesn't get any advantage. In fact, if anything, it works against her, because the closer to the election you get bad numbers, the worse it is. So it's actually it's like it's like with James Comey, the whole James Comey thing, right? They just constantly try to revise history, right? And they get away with it because their base is they have memories of a goldfish and the brain's the size of a peanut or a walnut. I can't work it. Peanut or a walnut, I'm not too sure, but that's how we can get away with it. We all know that Trump hates his base. We all know that Trump disrespects his base, because if you had respect for your own base, you wouldn't be lying so obviously like this, right? You wouldn't just be like lying all the time. Like with the whole James Comey thing, right? They're trying to make it out that James Comey was really good friends with Hillary Clinton, right? This is unusual because, if James Comey was really good friends with Hillary Clinton, he wouldn't have just opened up the email files a week before the election, right? Where it all gets opened up in 2016, just before the base only looks at Facebook and Fox. They don't research anything. That's true, Joyce. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and so that's what I'm saying. Like that's what they do. They basically review history. And if anybody should hate James Comey more, the ex FBI director, it should be Hillary Clinton, and she's no big fan of his because, again, you wouldn't if they were in cahoots together. Thanks, Marty. If they were in cahoots together, he wouldn't have opened up the files, like the email files, a week before the election, 2016. Right? That didn't help her. Right? The Labor Statistics Bureau, right, renewing the numbers to make the unemployment rate higher, right, didn't help Kamala because it was done before the election, not afterwards. So there's this constant lies by Trump where he takes a little bit of truth, right, and then he turns it into a lie. But that little bit of truth doesn't mean anything because the actual lie itself overcomes that little bit of truth. And you're seeing this all the time, right? And I think the big problem for the Democrats is going to be overcoming this complete BS, because there is a problem with the communication world. He lies as he breathes. He does lie as he breathes. And the fact that he gets away, like recently, a couple of days ago, he said he wants to get rid of, he also wants to get rid of the unemployment numbers. So the unemployment numbers generally come out once a month, right? Now, the only reason he would want to get rid of the unemployment numbers is because he doesn't think they're going to be good. If Donald Trump thought the unemployment numbers in the next 6 months were going to be good, not only would he not get rid of it, he'd make them daily. He would go, daily, we're going to get the unemployment, because that's how confident I am. But because Donald Trump knows that the unemployment numbers are going to go up because of the tariffs, he is going to get rid of them, right? So again, and then these people who cover for him, these people on this sort of centrist, I call them kind of the centrist people in the tech world, the tech bros, and they do criticize him from time to time. So you can't really call them full on MAGA. And and the reason I dislike these people is because they know better. They're not like the normal MAGA people that you see, right? Who if basically believe anything Trump tells them. They were eating cats and dogs. They just believe anything he says, right? But these people are not those people. These people are intelligent. They understand the system. They understand he's lying, and they cover for him all the time, right? So with the Labor of Bureau of Statistics, they're saying, well, the numbers aren't that accurate, and therefore, all he's saying is we need to get more accurate numbers. Exact people who know better are the worst. That's right, Money. I agree. I feel sorry. I know this isn't going to sound great for a lot of liberals out there, but I actually feel sorry for a little bit of the MAGA people, the ones with the peanut brains and the worn-up brains, and that's because they're so easily manipulated that every time Trump says something so obviously like a lie, and then I see them on Twitter just go, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." I just think, "Oh, you poor little." I just think, how is it possible that these people can just live normal lives? How is it possible they don't fall over when they're walking? It just amazes me that there are people. You're being too kind, but I agree. Yeah, look, I don't know if peanut brain or worn up brain is super kind, but I do think they are worn up brains and peanut brains. I think there are different parts of MAGA. I think I do too, Joe. It's actually very pathetic. Yeah. If you were going to be if you're going to be like a con artist, like if you're a con artist out there, like imagine if you owned like some sort of, so you basically were a con artist, you had a group of con artists around you, high tech, right? And you wanted to get your hands on a database of people who are highly gullible, have worn up brains for brains, are easily persuadable and easily lied to. You couldn't get yourself a better database than the MAGA cult database. Honestly, you could. That is the best database to get for a con artist. There must be con artists all around the world paying massive amounts of money to get a database of contact details of MAGA people, so they can go and rip them off with the most, guys. You know, Blockbuster is coming back. It's going to be huge. Blockbusters is, videos. You go into this store and you rent videos. I wouldn't be surprised if they went and sold them that. They would actually buy it. He keeps them angry, blaming others for their pain. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like they're just so easily gullible and things. And that's why I kind of feel sorry for them, because I've actually met people who are Trump supporters in real life, and the stupidity is through the roof. That's why Trump ran as a Republican. Yeah, I agree. I think he ran as a Republican because, Marty, you're right, because the liberals are generally more informed, and that's one of the things that you will always see with polling, right? All the polling showed that the people who voted for Kamala were more informed politically, and the people who voted for Trump were less informed, which makes complete sense. It's not exactly a surprise, right? And that sort of shows that people who are less informed are easily persuadable. Trump is also good at going into those worlds that are not based on news, right? Outside of Fox News, like he went on podcasts and all that sort of stuff. He knows how to get outside of the news bubble, which is like, mainstream media. And so he can get more eyeballs from people than that. You remember when Trump said he loved the poorly educated? Yeah, he did. He does love, and he would love the poorly educated. I mean, think about this. Steve Bannon, who is like the kind of like the Yoda, right? Steve Bannon is like the Yoda of the MAGA movement, right? He's like this weird looking man who doesn't look like he's ever had a shower for a long time, and he has a really close relationship with Donald Trump, right? And he in a lot of ways, people kind of think he's like the soul of the MAGA movement, Steve Bannon. Years ago, Steve Bannon set up a charity, like a GoFundMe thing for a charity to help build the wall, right? And what they did is, him and a couple of other people, is they actually ripped those people off and collected the money, like a percentage of that money for themselves. And he basically was convicted of fraud. What's interesting is it wasn't fraud against the normal public. It was fraud against his own MAGA supporters, right? So again, it's even the MAGA leadership know how stupid their own base is, right? So he ripped off his own. His so Trump's one of the creators of the MAGA movement stole money from MAGA supporters, right? Like conned their own supporters, right? He gets convicted. What does Donald Trump do? Now, Donald Trump could have turned around and said, you know what, Steve, you have stole from my supporters. I don't want you anywhere near the MAGA movement anymore. Disgusting. But of course, he didn't do that. Instead, he pardoned him. Right? So he pardons the guy who stole money, right, from Trump supporters, right? To me encapsulates the whole MAGA movement, right? And to this day, Steve Bannon is considered like a hero of the MAGA movement. And when he's on TV, on YouTube or whatever, nobody ever says to him, Steve, you stole from your own people. That's a bad thing, isn't it? They never bring it up. It really does. How is it possible, right? And this is what I mean is they have no respect for their own base. They actually despise their own base, and that's why I feel a tiny bit sorry for their base. And when not a lot, but just a little bit because of how easily they are manipulated by these people. But the tech bros or these people they're not like that. They understand all this. They're smart enough to know that they're ripping people off, but they still support him, right? Because financially, he's a much better option. He got rid of, Trump got rid of regulations. Tim Cook had to go into the White House and present with him this like gold plate. It's just insane, like that. A lot of these people will also complain that when Biden was in power, that Biden ostracized Elon Musk, that he never invited him into the office, right? So whatever you think of that, Trump is 100 times worse because it's not that he's not inviting them into the office. He's inviting them into office, but they have to suck up to him. They have to. That is not. I think that's some sort of narco sort of system that he's set up here, where basically they have to like come in, genuflect, yes master to him, right? The richest people on the planet, right? And this is supposed to be the Republican Party, the party of free enterprise, right? The party of less regulation, the party of all that stuff is making the tech rich people come in and he'll give them what they want as long as he gets what he wants in return, right? So this is, and these tech people are basically, these tech people are basically, that's what they want to do. And they keep making excuses for him because they keep getting financial gains from him. And you see that all the time. So this particular person, a couple of people I've seen interviewed recently about the labor of statistics, right? Their excuse was, well, he's basically gonna make it more fair. They're gonna put money into it to make the polling better. But when I searched for that, I couldn't find one person in the Trump administration, including Trump himself, who said that now they've gotten rid of the person for the labor statistics, that they're going to replace that. They're going to put more money in to make sure the polling is more accurate. So therefore the data, none of them has said that. They fired the person. By the way, the person they fired isn't the person, right, who puts it all together. She's the person who reports it. So there is all these people in the background who put all the data together. They give it to her because she's the leader, and she just talks. She just says it. So how is firing her? Like even if you believe what he says, how does that make any sense? Because the people who actually came up with the data wasn't her. It wasn't like they gave her data and she just went, you know what? Nah, I'm going to make up my own stuff. There's no evidence of that at all. So again, it's just this. But they massage what he does. They massage what he does to make it seem better. They're like, well, look, do you agree there's problems with the data? And most people would say yes. And that's how they think they get around it, right? And they'll go, okay, yeah, but that's not what he's saying. He's not saying there's problems with the data. He's saying the data is rigged. And there's a massive, I heard Wall Street will need to hire their own data folks. Yeah. And here's the thing, the last country that actually, when businesses can't believe what the government tells you, this happened in Argentina what happened is the bond market went crazy, right? Because people aren't gonna want to invest in America, and people aren't going to want to invest in American bonds is they can't believe what's happening with the American economy. Why would you invest in America if you don't believe what the company? So people invest in American bonds and things like that because they think America is economically a very good country, right? It's like one of the places you can invest with little risk. But if you can't believe the reports or the data, then why would you invest there? It's very risky. Like you want to believe the data, right? So all Trump is doing is making countries like mine, Australia, or Europe, or people in Asia and that not want to invest in America because you can't trust the data. I'm not going to buy American bonds and things like that if I don't think if I think the American economy is going to tank. And how am I supposed to know it's not going to tank? Because I don't have the actual data. Because again, the data is not always 100% accurate to begin with, but generally speaking, in the next 2 months, it's pretty accurate, right? So, and all they need to do, everyone says it, is you give them more money, right? Give the government more, this particular labor statistics more money so they can do higher quality polling with more people. The more people you poll, the better, more accurate it becomes. That's all they need to do. But nothing is rigged. There was nothing, the numbers weren't rigged against Trump, and that's the big problem. So these people, these tech bros, right, basically just covering for him, are just going around, saying, oh, but he's just no, he's not. He's not saying he wants to put more money into it, right? He's not saying that we need more accurate polling. He's not saying any of that. He's saying that the person in charge lied. That is a complete fault. So again, you've got to be these people, and these people go on like Fox News, CNN, and they're really good at massaging the truth of that because again, they do criticize Trump from time to time. So they try to position themselves as like centrist, right? Or they position themselves like as people that aren't super partisan. That's their whole shtick, It's like, no, I criticize Trump and things like that. No, it's way worse than that. They are super, super partisan people, and all they care about is letting Trump off the hook, right? For the lies that he does. Because at the end of the day, right, if you can't trust, hi Linda, how you going? Nice to see you. Thanks for the laugh hearts. If you can't trust, right, your government's financial reports for a country like America, that is big trouble. That is massive trouble for America. Yeah. And I think Trump can see the writing on the wall. He can see that, as more and more people are affected by inflation, as more and more people prices go up because it takes a while for prices to go up. And the other thing that happens when Trump puts tariffs on other countries, including my country, Australia, is we're already doing this in Australia. He put 10% tariffs on us, and he's also put tariffs on our medicines. We don't know what the end result of that because he's like paused it or whatever. But what we do now in Australia is we're like, okay, fine. Well, you know what? We can't sell as much into America, right? Because it's too expensive and people aren't going to buy it. This is the problem with the whole tariff argument, right? They're like, we've got like billions of dollars coming in. Here's the problem, right? There is going to be less money coming in because the more expensive things are, right, the less people are going to buy it. So over time, because what happened was when Trump initially put on the tariffs, a lot of these importers, right, importers, they sold up, they sent a whole bunch of stuff in massive amounts because they wanted to get in before the actual tariffs came in. So you had all these American importers with massive amounts of stocks of stuff before the tariffs got put on because they sent it out really quickly, right? And they had all these stocks there. So those stocks were being sold to Americans at the old rate. They're starting to run out of those stocks now, right? And now the stocks that they're getting in from other countries are now the tariff ones. And the tariff ones, so it's taken a while, right, for it to go from that. And that's why now we're starting to see the data. Also, a lot of American businesses did actually eat the tariff for a little while because they thought it might be like temporary because Trump kept like putting them up, then he put them down, then he put them up, so they were like, you know what, let's just eat the tariffs for a couple of months, and then he'll bring them down, and then we can just move on. But that didn't happen. He's now kept the tariffs up a lot, and so now they're already saying, like Walmart, all these people, they're saying, well, okay, well, now that the tariffs are here to stay, we can't keep eating the tariffs. We're going to have to increase it. So as more time goes by, you're going to see big effect. Now, again, a lot of these people are lying because they're going, well, wait a sec, these tariffs have been around for a couple of months, but they don't take into consideration that these people bought in massive amounts before the tariffs got in because they were given time to buy, right? And that supply is now running out, and the new stuff that's coming in is tariffed, right? So you're going to start seeing prices increase. That's not coming from me. That's coming from people that were buying medication from Canada because much cheaper, said due to tariffs. Now their medication is going up a lot from Canada. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right, Marnie. Because it takes time for a lot of it to wash through the system. And working in retail, people are buying less already. Exactly, Joyce. And that's the thing. Like Trump's been going around with all these graphs showing Americans got in billions of dollars, right? All this stuff. Well, that was because a lot of these companies were eating the tariffs, right? Because they thought it was temporary. Now they know it's not temporary. Those tariffs are going to definitely be moved on. And what happens is once prices go up, is people buy less. So this idea that somehow, so they're basing all this amount of money that they're going to get based on people buying the same amount of stuff that they did before the tariffs. But of course, they're not going to buy the same amount of stuff. If you have to pay extra, people won't buy as much. So whatever extra income they're making from the government's making from the tariffs is going to come down because people are going to buy a lot less of that stuff once they pass it on, once the retailers pass it on to the actual people. So it doesn't make any sense, right? Of why they think this is going to work. Now, I'm not against like targeted tariffs. You know, you can have tariffs, for example, on the computer chips, the CHIPS Act, which the Biden administration brought in, right? And they brought it in because they didn't want because China had a monopoly on the chips and all that stuff. I get that, but at no stage did the Biden administration say making it in Australia. Right, companies aren't hiring, are they? Yeah, making it in Australia, making chips in America is cheaper than making them in China. Of course, it's not. They know that it's more expensive to make things in America than it is, but they're doing it. They're doing the chips because it's a national security thing, right? So I get tariffs in national security during COVID, right? America didn't have enough masks, didn't have enough medical equipment, right? Okay, so America should make up more of that stuff. It's going to be more expensive, right? But it's a national security thing, so you make more of it. This is the difference between the Democrats and Republicans. At least the Democrats go, look, making our own chips, you know, making our own hospital stuff, equipment, face masks, whatever, is more expensive to make here, but we need to do it because we need to have, if another pandemic happens, we need to have more stock, right? The Trump administration is trying to pretend like making stuff in America is not going to be more expensive, right? And they're putting tariffs on things that are not national security. Paying extra for furniture is not national security, right? Paying extra for toys or food on things like that, when there are, it doesn't make any sense. How is it national security to bring up the price of coffee? Like, somehow, it doesn't make any sense. So at least when Biden administration brought in tariffs, and even to some degree, the first Trump administration was much better with the tariffs because it was more targeted, right? But this administration is just across the board, doesn't make any sense. And again, it's just this way of thinking is incredible because what's happening is in countries like mine, I know in Europe with wine, right? Sort of like champagne wine, all this sort of stuff, right? All these people in Europe are basically now saying that we need to find new markets. So they're not even looking at selling. So their long-term vision is, tariffs give Trump more money to spend. I agree it does give him more. It will give him some more extra money, but I don't think it's going to be as much as he thinks it is. And also with the tax cuts that he's going to keep in, that's also not going to give him enough money, right? It's not enough revenue because, again, countries are, people are going to buy so much less things in America, which means that those amounts will be less, and those countries will find new markets. In Australia, we're in Asia in Australia, right? So we're starting to do a lot more stuff with China at the moment. And that's, one of the big winners out of this is going to be China, because China will start exporting things to countries like Australia or Europe and things like that, right? And the other thing that Trump, which I find quite funny, is that Trump said about my country, Australia, that we wouldn't allow meat. Money, I think we already hit for in debt. Yeah, it's insane. In Australia, Trump got angry because we stopped beef exports to from America to Australia. Now, he says it was a tariff, but it was actually there was never a tariff, right? We never put a tariff. We never put a tariff on American beef. The reason we weren't importing American beef is because of the mad cow disease. When America gets beef in America, it brings some beef in from Mexico and South America, who in the past have been tainted with some diseases. In Australia, because we're an island, we're very strong on biosecurity, right? Our meat is generally considered some of the best quality in the world, together with Japan. We don't use massive amounts of antibiotics on our meat. It's more clean meat that we have. Our quality of meat's higher. In America, it's more processed meat. And so the reason we didn't have it here was not because we were scared of American competition. We definitely were not scared of American beef, right? If anyone's we would be scared of would be Japanese beef, because their Wagyu beef is, it's amazing, right? It's similar to Australia. So we have some of the best quality meat in the world, and we don't want our meat tainted with American meat, which is some of the worst quality meat in the world. And that's because also it has to feed a lot more people than in Australia, so they have to make things quicker and all that sort of stuff, right? So again, he lied. It was never about tariffs, right? Now, since then, we have actually allowed American beef into the country. I think the government did it as a way to keep, Trump calm, because we only ended up with 10% tariffs. But where Trump is wrong is where he thinks that Australians are not going to buy American beef, right? In fact, all the people who in Australia said, we're not buying American beef, right? So it's not going to change. I'm afraid of our food supply with RFK. Yeah, well, with RFK Jr., I wouldn't be surprised if there's ivermectin in all the meat, right? He's probably put ivermectin in the beef, the sausages, the pork, everything, because according to RFK Jr. and those people on that side, they think ivermectin pretty much cures everything. So I wouldn't be surprised of that. And of course, so I wouldn't. Again, it was another lie that he did. It's interesting thing that you mentioned RFK Jr., because what I do find a little bit interesting, Joyce, is that the RFK Jr. announced that they're going to stop putting more money into mRNA vaccines, right? For colds and flus and things like that, right? Now, mRNA vaccines recently have started to do a lot of stuff, right, with cancer and things like that, and there's been some promising trials. So I don't know why you'd want to go away from mRNA vaccines. They're considered like they could be very helpful in the future for things like cancer. We don't have enough proof, but there's some strong evidence. The interesting thing is when Trump was asked about, because remember the mRNA vaccines became a big thing when Trump started Operation Warp Speed during COVID, and that was done under him. It's always been a bit of an awkward thing for Trump that the two things, right? The two things that the MAGA base hate is COVID vaccines, which he helped bring in with money, right? And the other thing they hate is anything to do with the Epstein files. Those two things are very awkward for Trump, right? Because he keeps saying that what he did with the mRNA vaccines was a great thing, right? And I don't disagree that pumping money into that was a good thing. I think the mRNA vaccines were good, right? So, but the problem is it's contradictory, right? When RFK Jr., we will lose so many wonderful signs. Yeah, contradictory when RFK Jr. comes out and says that the mRNA vaccines are not effective for this sort of stuff. His boss is the ones who help bring it in. So there's this weird thing where Trump wants to still take credit for the vaccines, but at the same time, his health minister is basically saying, they're not very good. Joyce, I've read from others that the people in the Trump cabinet are trying to bring Armageddon pestilence, war stuff. Yeah, it's just like I just feel like the Trump administration um, is very anti-science. It's one of the worst things about Trump and his administration is how bad they are with science and things like that. And that's because they don't, RFK Jr. will often say you can't trust the scientists, right? But then when he comes out with things like stopping the mRNA vaccine, it's like, okay, well, who made that decision? Was it scientists who made the decision, or who was it? He won't say it. He won't say who made the decision to stop the mRNA vaccines, right? Because you can't sit there and say don't try, because he said the evidence, the science. He said he looked at the evidence, he looked at the science, right? That's what he said. I looked at the evidence, looked at the science, and it showed that the mRNA vaccines were not effective, right? So in terms of like, so he pulled money out of that. Now, who are the scientists that he's talking about? Because he's telling us not to trust the scientists, right? So is he saying instead trust him, the lawyer, instead of actual scientists? So again, it's just I feel like the Trump administration is taking America back to the dark ages, whether it's through lies, whether it's through science, or not. I mean, how many times do you hear about climate change these days? I mean, nobody talks about climate change anymore in America. I don't even hear the Democrats really talk about climate change that much either. It's like climate change has disappeared from the conversation in America. And I think that's a big problem, because the Heritage Foundation wants the American public to be uneducated, unhealthy. Yeah, yeah, I agree, Elise. The brainworm ate most of his brain. Look, Marnie, I actually think that brainworm, Marnie, is actually didn't die. I actually think that brainworm in RFK Jr. faked his own death. This is my conspiracy theory. I feel that brainworm is still in control, right? Because if you think about brainworms, they they don't like things to be. They like dirty stuff, right? And RFK Jr. constantly he talks about swimming in sewage. Like he does. He literally talks about swimming in sewage and stuff like that. Now that makes me think the brainworm is still in control, right? I mean, the brainworm is telling him go swim in sewage because that's what brainworms like. They like dirt, scuff, and stuff like that. So I do feel the brainworm faked his own death. He's still in power. Okay. Yeah. So and the brainworm is basically the health minister in America, right? So, you know, do I have evidence for this? Yes, I think I have strong evidence. Don't ask me what it is. But yeah, so I think a lot of these people are basically, living on another planet about this stuff. The fact that he got RFK Jr., I think part of it is that Trump thought that RFK Jr. did really well with the online people, which he does. He does really well with the online people. He got Tulsi Gabbard, right, who's basically Marty. I'm only joking. I don't actually think the brainworm is in control. I'm joking. I don't actually believe that. Yeah. But it would be an interesting book, that if we did find out the brainworm faked his own death, that would be an interesting book. It'd be interesting, like sci-fi movie. It could be like an interesting sci-fi movie. I thought it was the drugs he uses. Well, it could be now, Joyce, the problem is did the brainworm have control of the drugs? Like, was he telling him? I think the evidence is the crap that comes out of his mouth. Yeah, yeah. I think one of the interesting things is that also the other person he got. I've got to say, the two people who I really despise. Yeah, I despise everyone in the MAGA movement, but the two people I really despise, I have to say, is RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, because I feel like they're grifters, right? I feel like they're real grifters. And Tulsi Gabbard, she kind of got up on the out with Trump a little bit, because she kind of pushed back against like bombing Iran. And then as a way to get back into his good books, she basically came up with this story to divert attention away. This is when the Epstein files were at its biggest height. And so she comes out and says, well, Obama should be in jail, or, all this sort of stuff. And like, of course, a couple of weeks on, and Obama, nothing's happened to Obama. It was all like BS bullshit. It was a way to divert attention for Epstein. But she did that. She did that. She actually did that to get back in favor with Trump. At least imagine the EPA director doesn't understand climate change. He's a denier. It's effectively gutted the age. Yeah, they 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 absolutely. It's amazing how climate change is not spoken about anymore. And what's interesting is when people talk about climate change in America's conservatives, or if you watch Fox News, they will always use Greta Thunberg, right, or a celebrity, right, as the reason why you shouldn't believe in it. Or they'll find one post from someone who said, "Oh, the Earth is going to explode in 1 year." They always look for the most, the people who they think are less credible. It's like done. But one of the things that I always do when I debate MAGA or I talk to MAGA on Twitter is I say, let's forget about them. Let's just talk about climate scientists. And that's when they fall flat on their feet because 99% of climate scientists believe that climate change is real and it's made and it's really happening. And they never want to have a conversation about climate scientists. That they'll argue about Greta. Oh, did you see Greta Thunberg tied herself to something? Or, someone said this or something, it's always like a celebrity or something like that. They don't want to talk about the climate scientists because they know, right? This is another thing I like to say to MAGA is there are climate scientists at NASA and a lot of Republicans like NASA, right? And I think there's like 85 climate scientists at NASA, and every single one of those climate scientists believe climate change is real and is a real big thing, right? So again, NASA plans to decommission satellite missions that gather information on climate. Yeah, I know. And look, I think Suzanne, I think this is what one of the biggest issues that's happening is there is so much going on with Trump and he's doing so many crazy things that climate change just gets pushed to the background. And I also think that it's hard for Democrats to, for some reason, climate change is a hard thing for people on the left to fight for. And I don't just mean that in America, I mean that in Australia as well. In Australia, years ago, we left wing parties would talk about climate change all the time. And now they don't, they still talk about it, but to a much lesser degree. I feel like it's the same in England and Europe as well. I feel like it's a weird situation because you're seeing these weather events that are happening all around the world, right? And one of the things about an American being America, and I don't mean about the people on this thing, but I just mean generally America. And I hope you don't take this personally because I'm not talking about you guys. Um, but America is a bit of an insular country. Like people in America don't look at what happens overseas as much. Like they don't look about what happens in Europe and all that. They're just more concentrated on what's happening in America, as where countries like Australia or Europeans, they're more likely to look around the world more and see things, around. So as an Australian, I'm interested in American politics, from England. So you see all these climate events that are happening all around the world, not just in America. Obviously, you had what happened in California with the fires, right? You had the Texas floods. In Spain, in a place called Valencia last year, they had these ridiculous floods that they'd never seen before in their lives where hundreds of people died. It was massive, right? I don't know how many people in America would have seen that. In Spain right now, in France, you're having some of the biggest heat waves in history with massive fires, right? In Australia, a couple of years ago, just before COVID, we had one of the biggest fires in our history. So these things are happening all around the world. And I think it's hard in America when you're just listening to American news because because if you put it in terms of a global thing, it makes more sense to talk about climate change. But if you're just talking about your own country, maybe you don't see as much of it. You know what I mean? And I think it also affects countries who are in the who are developing countries more because they don't have things like air conditioning. It also seems to be affecting a lot of countries like India, Pakistan, that sort of thing. So again, I think it's one of those subjects where you got to have the right people doing the messaging, right? And it's not that I dislike Greta Thunberg. I think she's great, but I just think in some ways she's not the best. She's good for young people and stuff like that, but she can be a bit divert. It needs someone like you need more climate scientists, right? And the problem is is that climate scientists are generally not the best communicators because a lot of scientists, people don't get into science, right, because they're great communicators, right? So it's kind of like the opposite, right? Everybody I know who's in science, they're like introverts, right? They're nerds, right? They're not great. I mean, there are people like Neil deGrasse and things like that, but he's more of an astrophysicist. I'm talking about American news is mostly designed to grab attention. Yeah. I'm talking about actual climate scientists, right? Um, you need more climate scientists who just do climate scientists, and they need to be good communicators. And they're the ones who should be going on Fox News. They're the ones who should be going on all these shows and promoting it, not not a 20-year-old activist, which is fine, or an actor and stuff like that. Because when people see actors doing this stuff, it can sometimes work against it to some degree. You know what I mean? So, and I was saying that it's I think it's in this day and age, it's more authentic, right? And where authenticity is such a big thing these days, I think it's more authentic to have climate scientists out there talking about climate science. You know what I mean? And I don't see a lot of it in America, and I don't see a lot in Australia. There used to be a couple of really good climate scientists in Australia a few years ago, and we had these big debates on our TV shows, and they always did really, really well. Oh, they did so well; it was incredible. Yeah. In fact, we had this TV show which is which is very popular in Australia, where people have debates. It's called Q&A, right? And there was a English program that came from the UK, and it said that it was the documentary was a right wing documentary that said that the whole climate change thing is a con to get money from people, right? And so everyone got to watch the documentary, and then afterwards they had the guy who made the documentary who was like he was like didn't believe climate change was real, and next to him was a climate scientist from Australia, right? And the climate scientist absolutely embarrassed this other guy. This other guy had no idea what he was talking about, right? He was a journalist. He wasn't a climate scientist. This, to me, gave me a great example of a climate scientist who was also a good communicator, which is probably rare, right? And someone who's just a grifter, right? Who's like a journalist. And when you put those people together, right? The guy who was a journalist and anti-climate change got shown to be an absolute fraud. And again, it's better to have that than an advocate or an actor or Greta Thunberg. You need to have actual climate scientists out there telling the story, explaining for and maybe in America, maybe that climate scientist is from NASA. That would be even better, because Fox News don't want to be arguing with climate scientists. They want to be arguing with Greta Thunberg. They want to be arguing with some some advocate group or something like that. People who are not climate scientists. The last people they want to be arguing with is climate scientists. Yeah, because they know they don't have the science on their side, right? And they know that for a fact. They don't have that science on the side. So yeah, and this is the other thing I want to talk about today was the way Democrats and Republicans, and here I'm talking about MAGA, right, communicate and market themselves. And I do think Republicans, well, especially MAGA, are better at communication, right? They're better at lying to people. They're better at, that sort of stuff, like communicating what they want to do. And Democrats have a way of falling for traps that the Republicans and MAGA set them. They set them traps, right? I want to give you an example, right? Sydney Sweeney. Now, everyone's heard about the Sydney Sweeney thing. I know it's not a big deal, but I want to use it as an example of how they tried to trap us, right? There was an ad, right, by Sydney Sweeney, who I don't know that much about it, but I know a little bit about it. She's an actor, whatever. Yeah, I saw the ad, right? And in the ad, it talked about genes, right? And the genes basically. And then after that, there was a few people on TikTok, right? People on the left on TikTok who said, "Oh, this person's a Nazi. These people are Nazis," and all that, right? Now, I'm sorry if I disagree with people here. That she's not a Nazi because of that ad, right? She could be a Nazi for other reasons, but not because of that ad, right? And we basically, right, gave the Republican Party got like free goals, free kicks, right, whatever you call it in America, right, by buying into that, right? Not many people did, But I want to give you an example of this. Sydney Sweeney thing is just one of many examples of how they're much better at messaging than Democrats are, right? Because they did it on purpose. This is not a thing. This is how the MAGA media works, especially in Twitter world. Most people in the MAGA world are on Twitter, right? And there's all these MAGA influencers on it. And some of these MAGA influencers, they have millions of followers. They're also on YouTube, they're on Rumble, they're on all these different things, right? And then you have the mainstream media, Fox News, Newsmax, Elaine, and they take it to the mainstream world, to the older populations, right? Who follow Fox News. So this is how it works. So one or two people on the left comment on this, right? MAGA media sees this and they know this is a win for them culturally. And the culture wars are very important. They're not important because, um, um, thanks, mate. They're not important because in itself, but they're important about how they get the general population to believe a certain thing about a political party. If the goal of MAGA was to say, look at these liberals losing their mind, calling her Hitler because of a TV ad, calling her a Nazi because of a TV ad. And for the average American, right, they look at that and they think that's nuts. Why are they calling her? And she could be a Republican, she could be whatever, but she's not a Nazi because of that ad, right? And so all you're doing is they loved it. When they saw that, and all it took was one or two people on the left, right? They exaggerated. Their goal of MAGA media is to make it's all of the liberals. It's all of the Democrats. It's not just a couple of people saying this, right? What happens then is on the left is some people get trapped into this and they think they are better at honing in on something and pounding it. Oh yeah, it's right, Marnie. They just repeat it over and over again. But this sort of stuff with Sydney Sweeney, they do all the time, and it's effective, right? And the way they do it is they basically what happens is if you're on the left and you're hearing all these people, right, saying, oh, these left wing people are saying that she's a Nazi, some people will just go, oh well, I'm not gonna agree with the MAGA people, so I'm gonna say she's a Nazi as well, right? And then it kind of there's a vicious cycle, right? And then more people will go, well, I don't know, she might be a Nazi, whatever. And then they get more material. All you're doing is you're giving them more material. Well, here's another person who's saying it. Here's another person who's saying she's a Nazi. It's not just one or two. And so it catapults, right? We need to learn to be better to not fall for those traps, right? We should have I do realize that most people ignored it. Most people didn't think she was a Nazi because of it, and most people weren't crazy. I get that, right? But there was enough there, right, for them to grab on. And then what they do is they talk about it 24/7, right? Then they turn it into memes, right? They turn it into memes. Then they'll have, white people with with blonde hair wearing jeans going, I'm a Nazi, like making fun, right? Then it was only a few people on the left, but that's all. Yeah, that's right. It's very hard. But what it shows is that even though a small percentage of people on the left did this, that was enough to make it go viral, right? And then what happens is people like Joe Rogan and that who've been turning against Trump because of the economy, because of picking people up from Home Depot and all that stuff, they've been turning against Trump. This is how they get Joe Rogan back in. This is how they get those podcasters back in. The podcasters hate this stuff about the Democrats. They hate how Democrats are overly sensitive about stuff, right? So then suddenly Joe Rogan's talking about it. He's going, have you seen the Democrats losing? They're calling her a Nazi. Now Joe Rogan is now moving back towards MAGA, right? The culture wars are very important because of how they escalate things, right? And they escalate things that way. It's much harder for people on the left to do the same thing with the right? It's much harder because we don't have the same infrastructure that they have. We don't have the same people, like a lot of people who supported Trump, like Trump picked up a lot of the young men, right? And it's a lot of the young men who are on Twitter, who are on YouTube, who are on Rumble and all this stuff. They're the people creating this stuff. They're the people pushing this stuff and then it becomes viral, right? And then even if they just push it in their own communities, eventually left-wing people will fall for the trap and they'll start talking about it and suddenly it's now in all communities, right? And so it's a hard thing to get away from because how do you stop? You can't stop everybody because with social media, everybody has a voice. So you can't stop everyone from saying, look, maybe we should don't fall. At least they have gathered their supporters in huge numbers and reach out and send out the propaganda for the year. They saturate their base and grab the ones. I mean, yeah, exactly. At least they have a better infrastructure, right? An online infrastructure where if you go on Twitter, they have so many more influencers. And they're more willing to lie. They're more willing to all jump together. So they it's like a coordinated thing. And I'm not saying they're like talking to each other, right? I don't think they're talking to each other, but they all know, right? Someone like Megan Kelly, who's the ex Fox News, but she now is on YouTube and she has a massive audience, right? And she started pushing it. So where does it go from there? It goes to Piers Morgan, right? Piers Morgan has a massive audience for his show online as well. And he picks up a lot of independents because he sometimes criticizes Trump, right? So now you've gone from a niche thing to Piers Morgan, to Megan Kelly, to Fox News, right? To all these Joe Rogan, and now suddenly it's a big story, right? Then the New York Times starts talking about it. The Washington Post starts talking about it, right? CNN starts talking about it, right? And it's making us look like we're loonies, right? And that's not a good thing. And the culture war things is very important because you are never going to win back the young men or a lot of the young people by doing this stuff. Yeah. So I just think that the Liberals and the left needs to be better at communicating. Don't call if you're going to call someone a Nazi, make sure they're a Nazi, like 100%, not 80% Nazi, not 90% Nazi. They have to be 100 because if you call everybody a Nazi, including someone for Baker Jeans ad, then that word loses its strength, right? That word loses its power, right? You should only call Nazis Nazis. Democrats are still unorganized. Nobody is leading an okay but yeah, exactly. And they are, stick to, I think the way, it always reminds me, Elise, of the 2024 election where Democrats ran a TV, like old school legacy media, right, campaign, and MAGA ran a new media campaign, right? You could see that the whole time, right? Kamala Harris was on MSNBC, CNN. She was on all these mainstream medias. And where's Trump? He's on podcasts. He's on another podcast. He's showing up at sporting events. He's showing up at UFC. He's showing up at football events, right? He's not just picking the news people because a lot of people, as we know, they're not following news like every day. So he's getting in front of people who don't follow news. They might just be sports orientated people. And a lot of those people were young men. Right. And when I say young, I don't even mean like under 20. I'm talking about like under 45, even under 50 these days. He was picking up a lot of these people. So Democrats need to find a way to win back these groups, right? And they're not going to do it by calling Sweeney a Nazi because, she's a white person with that. The culture wars will never be won by the Democrats, right? In some ways, the Democrats do win the culture wars in terms of, I think, even though I think things have gone backwards a little bit in terms of gay marriage, in terms of accepting gay people, I do think it has gone back because of Trump to a couple of years ago. But it's still not what it was like 30, 40 years ago. It's still better than that. So I think in some ways the Liberals do win the core, but a lot of people online, a lot of people, young people, they think that Democrats go too far, right? And I think that, the problem is it's not so much that Democrats are saying stupid stuff online, it's that everyone has a voice, right? And you can't control every single person what they're saying, right? But the problem is MAGA knows how to take those tiny percentage of Liberals and then try to paint everyone with the same brush. And that's a very tough thing to do. We've got to work out a way to get around that. And I think the way to get around that, and it was you saw in 2024, right? The elections, you had that ad from the Republicans that everyone knows about. They are for them, but we are for you, which was about a trans ad. But they tied the trans ad to the economy. And this is the thing about the culture wars. The culture wars is ultimately about the economy, right? And this is why it is. If in a recent poll, the New York Times went and spoke to like about 40 or 50 people, right, from last year who voted for Donald Trump, so voted for Joe Biden in 2020, right? Then they voted for Donald Trump. So they're swing voters, right? And one of the things that they said a lot, because remember, Trump picked up the male vote. One of the things they said is that the Democrats were too concentrated on DEI. They were too concentrating on the culture, on trans issues, gay rights issues, all that, and they weren't concentrating on things on cost of living and inflation. Now, this is where the problem is. That's actually not true. The Democrats were not concentrating. In fact, we all know the Democrats were not talking about woke stuff or culture wars and stuff like that. In fact, they ran away from woke so far, they ended up in the hands of Dick Cheney or Liz Cheney. So that's not exactly woke. But they managed to manipulate. Here's the thing. They're manipulating the culture wars. They're winning the culture wars. And by winning the culture wars, they're in some ways winning the economic story. And the economic story is that Democrats are too interested in DEI and all this stuff, and they're not interested in the average person as well. Now, Zoran Mandami is, you in all ways you would consider woke, but he didn't run on woke, he ran on cost of living, right? So I see Zoran Mandami, and you don't have to agree with his policies, but I mean in terms of how he won that primary, is he talked about cost of living, he talked about rents, he talked about housing prices and things like that. And I think that's how Democrats win. They stay away from the culture wars, but you still got to confront the culture wars when it goes viral. So that ad they ran last year, they are for them, they are for you. The Democrats should have confronted that ad, right? The Sydney Sweeney thing, they should have basically said, well, I don't even know about this Sydney Sweeney thing. It seems to me like the people talking about all the time seem to be Republicans talking about it, which is the truth. Everywhere I went, I saw way more Republicans and MAGA people talking about Sydney Sweeney than I saw the left, right? But it was too late. Once it got out of hand, once it got to mainstream media, Fox News and all that, the story, they in some ways you can say they won that war, right? I don't think it means as much as it did in 2020, 2024, because at the moment, the big thing working against Trump, and I don't think the culture wars is necessarily going to make him win, but I think it could. Democrats really need to win every single vote that they can, because you've got Republicans gerrymandering, which means that they have to pick up more seats, right? And so that means that they need to win every single vote they can, right? And that means to some degree they need to win the culture wars as well. And so they have to, get back on the good side of young men. They have to get back on the good side of working class people, right? And they can definitely do that, right? And I think the way they do that is by concentrating on the economy, cost of living. Trump is now the incumbent. That's not a good thing for Trump. He's an incumbent when prices are going up. You can't blame Biden. He will try to blame Biden, but it doesn't work, right? Where Trump is in trouble is that a lot of people who don't follow politics closely, right? They base who they vote on their cost of living. And right now they know Trump's in power and things are not getting cheaper. They're not going to vote for him, right? So again, that's something that's going to work in Democrats' hands. So I think that's like a thing that could, at the midterms do well for Trump. But again, they've got to win as many votes as they can. And the electoral college system I think at the moment is working against the Democrats. It's working in Trump's favor. So, so you they need to pick up young men, and then they need to pick up working class people, especially in the Rust Belt states. So I think they're going to have to, go into enemy territory. They're going to have to talk to people like Joe Rogan. They're going to talk to people like in that podcast world, and it's going to be uncomfortable, right? They might get asked questions about the COVID lockdowns and things like that because they're obsessed with it, but they're just going to have to do it. There's really there's no way for Democrats to get out of this, but they've got to get out of the comfort zone and they've got to go into enemy territory, and that's the only way they can get out of this. There needs to be people in the online space, right? Influencers in the online space who learn from what the MAGA media is doing, right? And be willing to confront those people in MAGA media, right? I think the Democrats won the Epstein battle. There's no doubt about that. I think we definitely won the Epstein battle, right? That was a big win for the Democrats. But, it is dying down already. You're seeing less and less of it in the media. I don't necessarily think as Democrats, we can just talk about Epstein all the time. I think because there is a whole bunch of people, and that's not to say we should forget about Epstein, but at some stage you have to talk about something else, right? You can still talk about Epstein, but other stuff as well, because I don't think people are going to vote for Democrats because of Epstein as much, right? Because Epstein was always a bigger issue for hardcore Republicans and MAGA people, right? I don't think it's going to pick up heaps of votes. Where it will help the Democrats is I don't think people are going to go. I don't think full-on MAGA people who are obsessed with Epstein for years are going to become Democrats. I don't believe that. But where it could help Democrats is they don't vote. They stay away from voting. So that helps Democrats as well. If it's not just, I think there's a thing here where a lot of people are saying, we can pick up those Epstein people who are obsessed. I actually don't think that's reality. I don't think at all they're going to go Democrats. Unless we had a Democrat who was like RFK Jr., who's really into conspiracies and stuff, I don't think they're going to vote for like an establishment like Democrat. I think the best thing we can hope for with the Epstein thing is a lot of those people stay home and don't vote, because that's a big advantage for us, right? So there's that. So yeah, I do think that's going to help us in terms of voter turnout. There's going to be less voter turnout on their side because of the Epstein thing. And there's also a bit of a civil war happening at the moment as well between those people on the right. So that's also a positive thing as well. Yeah, but anyway, we'll wait and see what happens with all that. We do need to keep talking about Epstein. You're right, Marnie, but we need to also talk about the economy, because cost of living, in my opinion, is without a doubt going to be the number one issue. Yeah. And every exit poll from the last election showed that was the number one issue why people voted for Trump, and will be the number one issue why people vote for Dems. So the Epstein thing is like our cultural thing to talk about in terms of, but we also need to have an economic message as well. We're not going to win just on Epstein. Yeah. Because all those people who are struggling to pay rent or buy a home because they can't get the mortgage, together, the Epstein thing is like a side issue for them. It's not their number one issue. People will always vote based on cost of living, housing, all that. In my opinion, I've said this a million times, I think Democrats could not lose by bringing in a massive house policy, for renters and for young people wanting to get into the market. I think home ownership or renting are the two biggest issues that is facing America, Australia, Europe, all those countries. And I just don't think you can go wrong. It can't be like we're going to do a little bit here, we're going to do a little bit there. It has to be like something really, really big. And here's the other thing about the housing thing, right? Is that who built homes? Working class people built homes, right? Tradies, you have in Australia, we call them tradies. In Australia, tradies are like plumbers, electricians, builders, right? They work on homes. So if Democrats want to get working class people back in, why not do a massive home building thing where you're going to build all these homes? So not just, housing, like homes, like government homes, Not just rich people's homes, but homes for middle class people as well. You don't just want to make it about the poor, you're about middle class as well. For everybody, it's just, in my opinion, it brings everyone in to the Democratic tent that needs to come in for us to win again. And, I just think, and then have another policy that's a big healthcare policy. So maybe like a public option. Maybe I think Medicare for all might be too much in America. So I think maybe a public option and then a massive home building thing, right? Those two things I think could absolutely win. There's no doubt about it. You have to bring in economic policies to win, right? You can see that at the moment with. I'm not saying Zoran Mandami. I have no idea if Zoran Mandami would win in a federal election. I don't know about that because I don't know how he would do well in the Rust Belt states. I think they would paint him as a communist and all that. And I think if they did that over and over, remember, Republicans are good at messaging. Maybe if they did that enough, his votes would come down. But we can certainly learn from populist policies that come in, right? As long as those populist policies are realistic, right? They have to be realistic, right? You can't just say stuff to make people vote for you, because this is where I think Trump went wrong. Trump lied so much, right, that those lies are now catching up with him, right? The wars are going to end in 24 hours. They didn't end in 24 hours. No new wars. He bombs Iran, right? Inflation's going to go down. It's going up, right? So the lies will catch up with you after the election. I think it's better to bring in policies that you've really thought about, that are realistic, right? And you really think they can be, and even be honest about it. Say, look, this is the policies we want to bring in, right? But to be honest with you, we will need to have enough people in Congress, in the Senate, and we'll need to have enough people in the House of Representatives to pass this bill. I don't see why it's a problem to be realistic with people, be honest with people, right? And say, look, we're going to need these things, so we're going to need a lot of people to vote for us, and we're going to need to get it. But if we can get enough people to vote for us, this is what we're going to bring in. But if we can't, we're going to have to negotiate, right? I just think it's better to be honest with people like that, so you don't set these high expectations and then they come down and things like that. So that's just my opinion. I think an economic policy, but again, Democrats need to do better with messaging, the culture wars, that sort of thing. And I think from that point of view, I think we could do a lot better. Anyway, I've got to go. Thank you so much for coming and listening to me, my Substack Live. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I'll try to do another one in a couple of days or 3 days. Send me a message if anyone wants to have a chat with me, or if you've got any questions or any subjects you'd like me to talk about in the future. Is there something particularly you would like me to talk about? I can do it at my next podcast or my next Substack Live. Thanks, Marnie. Thanks, all Christian. Thanks, all the people, Lisa, all the usuals who usually come to say hello. Thank you so much. Thanks for all the love hearts. I do love the love hearts. I'm not sure what they do, but they're amazing. They make me feel good. So thanks, guys. Thank you so much. See you later.